Hello everyone, welcome to Technologies Discussion channel. Today, I'd like to continue the discussion on sustainability. Okay, so for this video, I'm going to discuss what are actually Scope 1, Scope 2, and also Scope 3 carbon emission. Okay, so this will be the objective of this video. This will be the part 3 series discussion on sustainability. So guys, if you're keen to know more about sustainability, okay, please take a look on the playlist under the description. Over there, you will be able to find a series of discussion on sustainability. This is my email. If you have any question regards on this discussion, please drop me an email. Okay, or if not, if you want to have a faster response, okay, you are always welcome to ask me through the comment. Okay, before I continue, I'd like to urge you guys to help this channel by like this video. For those who are new to this channel, please consider to subscribe and turn on your notification bell. Once again, thank you so much for your strong support. Let's quickly kickstart by discuss what are Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 carbon emission. Okay, now because of regulation, okay, therefore, okay, more and more companies, they are actually seeking to reduce their greenhouse gas, okay, which is also known as GHG emission. Okay, the regulator actually come into enforcement many companies how to reduce their greenhouse emission. And therefore, when it comes to reporting the progress, okay, we often hear the word Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emission. Okay, but what do this number actually means? Okay, before I discuss on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 carbon emission, you probably have also heard about this word, which is called net zero. Okay, net zero does not mean that we don't use any energy at all. Okay, so put it very simply, okay, over here you can see that net zero refer to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gas that we actually produce and the amount removed from the atmosphere. Okay, so in short, okay, for example, we do any activities, okay, we basically contribute CO2 to the atmosphere. So now we must think how to remove the same amount of CO2 that we actually contribute to the atmosphere. So basically, we create CO2 and we also find a way how to remove this amount of CO2. So hence, because of this, it become net zero. Okay, so basically, it can be also achieved, okay, through a combination of emission reduction and also emission removal. Okay, net zero actually place much more focus on reducing carbon emission as much as possible first. Okay, which means that when you actually decide to do an activities, okay, we are actually focused, okay, how we can best minimize carbon emission as much as possible. Okay, so basically this is the meaning of net zero. Firstly, we concentrate how to reduce the carbon emission as low as possible, and then if we can't do anymore, basically we then will consider how can we actually offset this unavoidable, okay, residue CO2 as a last resort. Okay, so if possible, okay, but I don't think that any activities can have zero CO2. Okay, so most important is how can we actually compensate back the CO2? What are these three scope of emission? Okay, why we need to have these three scope of emission? Okay, to take action to reduce emission, okay, we first need to understand and also measure their source. Okay, so when we actually have a problem, okay, we must be able to understand the problem and we must also have a mean to measure, okay, the how big or how small the problem, then we can address the issue. Okay, so mainly the three scope actually catalyze the different kinds of emission a company values create in its operation and through its wider value chain, including its supply and customer. Okay, so in short, in order for the company to function, okay, you definitely need to have supplier. You also need to have client or customer. Okay, without this supplier and client or customer, the company basically cannot function at all. And therefore, for these three little scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, are three kinds of emission, okay, that the company actually use to monitor, okay, the progress. Okay, it is not clear, okay, why they are called scopes, okay, rather than groups or maybe even types. Okay, but the name actually come from greenhouse gas protocol, okay, the world most widely used greenhouse gas accounting standard. Okay, as the greenhouse gas protocol itself state, okay, developing okay, a full greenhouse gas emission inventory can actually incorporate scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission. Okay, so this will enable company to understand the full value change emission and also focus their effort on the greatest reduction opportunity. So in short, in order to fully describe the greenhouse gas emission inventory, then we need to describe them either actually a combination of scope 1, scope 2, and also scope 3. Okay, essentially, okay, scope 1 are those direct emissions that are owned or controlled by a company, by your company, for example. Okay, so basically, in short, for scope 1, okay, the emission is basically you actually own these so-called activities and you are actually able to control this activity. So basically, this is what we meant by scope 1. Okay, basically, this is what we call a direct emission, which you own and which you can control. Okay, but whereas scope 2 and scope 3, they are called indirect emission. Okay, basically they are a consequence of activities of the company, okay, but occur from source that not owned or controlled by it. Okay, for example, you have a so-called a company, okay, you definitely need power, okay, to make it function, correct? So basically the power that is delivered to the company is basically by another third party. And hence, because of this, okay, this is what we call a indirect emission. Okay, the source of the power is delivered, okay, for example, by the power service provider. And hence, because of this, the power, okay, you actually don't really own it and you don't have much control on it. Okay, let's quickly go through what is actually scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission. Okay, for scope 1, they actually cover emission from source that an organization own or control directly. Okay, for example, okay, from burning fuel in our fleet of vehicle. Okay, for example, a company own vehicles. Okay, so basically, these are all the direct so-called emission, okay, under this scope 1 emission. Okay, so because the vehicle belongs to the company and the company actually own it and also can control it. So hence this kind of category is fall under scope 1. Okay, as for scope 2 here, okay, scope 2 emission are those that a company cause indirectly from the production of the energy it purchase and use. Okay, for example, the emission generated from producing the electricity that we use in our building fall into this category. Okay, so in short, like I mentioned earlier on, okay, the company, for example, they need to have function, okay, so therefore they need to have power. And basically the power is from the power supplier. Okay, and therefore, because of this, this is actually fall under scope 2 emission. Okay, you don't own it, okay, you don't have much control on it. So therefore, they actually fall under this scope 2 emission. Scope 3 emission, okay, basically they encompass emission that are not produced by the company itself and do not result from activities involving asset owned or controlled by the company. Okay, so you can see the keyword here. Okay, they basically will not involve any asset owned. You don't own that particular asset and you cannot control at all by your own company. Okay, so instead, these emissions are indirectly generated up and down it value change. Okay, for example, okay, scope 3 emission occurs okay, when we actually buy, use, and dispose of product from supplier. Okay, for example, we need to buy something, raw material from the supplier. Okay, we use it, and then after that, we probably have some form of dispose all those products. Okay, so therefore, all this is fall under scope 3 emission. Okay, so basically, they are include all source cannot cover within scope 1 and scope 2 boundary. In short, okay, if these kind of activities that don't fall under scope 1 and also scope 2, then it will fall under scope 3. Okay, so I hope you have a better idea on scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1, direct emission. Okay, basically you only, okay, you actually have some form of control it. Scope 2 and scope 3 actually is indirect. Okay, so basically for scope 2, okay, for example, it actually, because of your activities, okay, for example, you have a company, okay, which you need power in order to function. And therefore, how you use the power, okay, basically become a scope 2 emission. As for scope 3, okay, probably is totally so it's one of the most difficult one under this scope 3 is basically the asset you don't really own. Okay, for example, those so-called raw materials, okay, that is supplied by your supplier. Okay, you don't really own it initially. Okay, so therefore, when you actually use this so-called raw materials and then you use it, and then how to dispose it can become a scope 3 emission. Okay, why it is important to understand this difference? Okay, understand and managing scope 1, 2, and 3, okay, greenhouse gas emission are essential for business for several reasons. Okay, so after several years, I believe that, for example, if you want to participate certain tender, okay, when you want to buy certain projects, you want to be involved in this project, okay, there may be regulation. Okay, at this moment, it's good to have, but very soon, instead of good to have, it become a must have. So basically, because of this, okay, therefore, it's always very important, okay, we understand this scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 now. Okay, first, okay, greenhouse gas emissions are a major contribution to climate change, okay, which can have significant environment and economic impact. Okay, by reduce their emission and carbon footprint, okay, business can help mitigate the negative effect of climate change and support the transition to a low carbon economy. Okay, so the key idea is basically from the government, the initiative from the government. Okay, because government has this requirement, it become a regulation. Okay, once it become a regulation, okay, more and more company need to compliant to this. Hence, okay, so rather than that, so it's always important to understand the key difference between this scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 first. Okay, second, okay, managing scope emission can help business improve their environment performance. Okay, you probably see nowadays, even for example, in terms of retail, okay, for example, Uniqlo basically allow you to recycle. Okay, for example, you can trade in your old clothing, okay, in exchange of some vouchers. Okay, so basically, in short, they basically help to improve the environment performance. It also contribute to sustainable development and net zero policy, okay, reducing energy consumption and help meet regulator requirement. Okay, so basically, when you actually fully understand this scope 1, 2, and 3, when you actually minimize the emission, okay, firstly, okay, you also help to reduce any unnecessary, which in turn save your cost also. And moreover, the most important is you are able to meet any regulatory requirement, okay, by the government, for example. Okay, many governments have established target and regulation to cut greenhouse gas emission. Okay, so basically, most of the government, okay, in fact, have this target, soft target at this moment, and they have this regulation, okay, how to enforce people to reduce the greenhouse emission. Business that demonstrate progress in reducing their emission may become eligible for incentive and other benefit. Okay, so this means that the government can, for example, offer some tax rebate, okay, if you able to achieve certain target that actually set by them. Third, managing emission can enhance a business reputation and provide a competitive edge. Okay, at this moment, you can see that, okay, more and more bigger organization, they actually want to do something with sustainability. So the key thing is basically they want to enhance their business reputation. Okay, so nowadays, okay, for company report, you need to have a sustainability report also. So basically, based on the sustainability report, okay, it actually, okay, will let the public to know, okay, how well your company is actually adapt to sustainability. And because of this, okay, so therefore, when you actually come on board onto sustainability, okay, not only you help to save costs, you also so-called enhance your business reputation. And therefore, because of this, you actually reduce all the costs, you become more competitive as compared to your competitor. Okay, increasingly, consumers, stakeholders, and investors are seeking organizations commit to sustainability and minimize their environment impact. Okay, so basically, start from government. Okay, so over here, after that, you can see that consumer, stakeholder, and investor, now they also want to compliant to the regulation that is set by government. So therefore, they are all committed to sustainability, By managing and reporting on their emission, okay, business can show their dedication to sustainability and potentially attract more customer and investor. Okay, no more greenwash. Okay, so therefore, whatever that you claim, okay, you actually need to show your dedication to sustainability. And because of this, okay, potentially, okay, you can see that more and more younger customers, especially, okay, they will be more inclined. Okay, so now you see a lot of recycle, so-called we actually want to use something that can be recycled. For example, when you actually pack your lunch, okay, you can see that they become a recyclable uh, material. Okay, so because of this, you actually pay more. Okay, however, okay, we can actually attract more customer, okay, to buy our product because of this case here. Okay, before I continue, okay, again, I like to urge you guys to help this channel by like this video. Okay, when more of you guys actually like this video will have a higher chances to reach out to a larger audience. So guys, help me by like this video. If you have learned something from this video, please consider to subscribe and turn on your notification bell. Thank you so much. Okay, so how easy it is when we actually want to reduce scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission. Okay, there are many considerations beyond emission alone, okay, such as cost and practical. Okay, so no point that we want to reduce the emission as much as possible. However, the cost come up increase rapidly. So therefore, we need to strike a balance by reducing our emission, and we need to keep our costs as affordable as possible. So therefore, this thing you need to have some form of trade-off. And also, whether is it practical to do? Okay, for example, I told you that in order to achieve net zero, for example, okay, then there's no one work in the company, for example. Whether is this possible? Whether is it practical to do this? So therefore, okay, we have some extent, okay, to choose, okay, for example, under this scope 1, our fleet is low or zero emission. Okay, so for example, as I told you that under scope 1, okay, we have vehicle. Okay, can we choose our vehicle? We reduce the number of vehicle, for example, okay, or we use a zero emission such as electrical car. So can this actually solve the problem? So basically, you need to do some trade-off, okay, to understand this. Okay, so determine how our building are heated and explore way to reduce the carbon footprint of production process. Okay, so basically this fall under scope 1. Okay, how about scope 2? Okay, for example, for a soft drink maker, okay, they actually can't control, okay, on the consumer side how they actually dispose of their plastic bottle. Okay, for example, if we don't recycle, okay, so therefore we just so-called discard. Okay, after we drink the so-called plastic bottle, it become non-sustainability, for example. So therefore, okay, for any manufacturer that detect whether we use the most or least eco-friendly setting on our laundry machine. So this is another example here. Okay, so which you can go into so-called retailer that sell laundry machine, okay, but they can't force you to buy the most so-called energy efficient one. So basically with this, okay, they can't enforce you, hey, you can only just buy this laundry machine, for example. And because of this, basically this actually fall under scope 2, okay, which you don't really own it and you don't really can control it. So quantified emission is somehow easier for scope 1 and 2. However, what I mentioned earlier on, if scope 1 and scope 2 is actually much easier, okay, because at least you have some role in fact on this scope 1 and scope 2 activity, for example. Okay, for instance, okay, company can obtain the data needed to convert direct purchase of gas and electricity into value for the associate greenhouse gas. Okay, however, for many organizations, okay, scope 3 emission account for the highest portion of total emission. Okay, so now you know that scope 3, okay, in fact, the emission is the highest, more than scope 1 and scope 2. Okay, however, unfortunately, they are also usually the hardest to reduce. Okay, like what I mentioned earlier on, scope 3 don't really belongs, the activities or even the asset don't really belongs to you. And you have the hardest way to control it. For example, okay, when you actually want to buy some raw material, okay, you have no control, okay, how your supplier actually process the raw material. Okay, you don't have much so-called control. And because of this, therefore, scope 3 is the hardest to reduce. Some action a company can take to address this include working with existing supplier and customer to find solution for reducing their emission. Okay, so you probably heard this now. Okay, so basically, when you actually want to supply certain material for example, Uniqlo again, okay, you actually need to compliant their so-called their company policy. And because of this, they actually work together, okay, with their supplier, okay, customer, which I mentioned earlier on based on the Uniqlo. Okay, for example, when you have old clothing, okay, you can actually trade in with Uniqlo to have some voucher. So basically, from here you can see that Uniqlo actually play a role. Okay, they basically work together with their supplier and also their customer, and then they actually find solution how to reduce their emission together. Okay, quantified CO2 and other greenhouse gas emission is also known as GHG, greenhouse gas accounting. Okay, so this may look very challenging, okay, especially true for large and complex business. However, the process is quite straightforward. So as long as you understand, okay, the process is actually quite straightforward. Okay, beginning by establish the reporting standard. Okay, so basically you start off, okay, by decide, okay, which are the reported standard that you want actually to use. Okay, for example, you can consider to use this greenhouse gas protocol. Okay, so this will be the first reporting standard that you may apply to, for example. So next, okay, you need to define the scope of your emission inventory, okay, by describe the boundary of total emission to be calculated, including your product or service life cycle, your supply chain, and many other value chain emission. Okay, so basically you can quantify what are the activities that you actually want to monitor, and then basically you can so-called have a boundary, okay, so as to continuous monitoring to reduce the emission. Okay, finally, quantify the total greenhouse emission, okay, within this scope. So basically, in short, okay, you need to audit, you need to monitor, and then finally to see whether you meet this possible goal or not. In addition, business can work with their supplier to encourage the adoption of more sustainable practice and the reporting of greenhouse gas emission data. Okay, for example, now, okay, so again, let me use the Uniqlo. Okay, so basically, for example, okay, they can actually request data from their supplier, for example, okay, how their greenhouse gas emission data. Okay, so from there, they actually can choose which are their preferred supplier, for example, for this case here. So basically, from here, you can see that they actually work with their supplier, and basically based on their report, okay, they decide which supplier to use. Okay, this may involve providing support and resource to help the supplier, okay, that understand the greenhouse gas protocol and implement emission reduction strategy. Okay, so in short, okay, because the supplier may be very new. Okay, in fact, all those SME, they are actually all very new to this sustainability. So therefore, MNC or even corporate such as government agent, okay, we all have a role to help this SME to understand what is actually the greenhouse gas protocol and then how we can actually help them to implement to reduce the emission. Okay, it may also involve cooperate with industry association and other organizations to develop and promote best practice for greenhouse gas emission reporting and reduction. Okay, business should regularly audit, okay, and then we inspect the performance of their supplier. Okay, we can use this checklist, okay, which is the supplier social and environment compliance checklist. So basically, for example, you have supplier, you actually can use this checklist to measure their emission. Okay, so based on the emission, for example, you can choose the lowest three emission, and out of these three, you can choose which supplier that you actually want to use, for example. So therefore, because of this criteria, okay, therefore, all the supplier will be keen to reduce their emission. Okay, consider using this checklist for internal inspection or send it to your supplier to perform the inspection themselves. Okay, overall, scope 1, 2, and 3 emission, they are all very important aspect of a business environment performance. Okay, because of regulation, okay, so therefore this scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, it become essential, okay, to measure the performance of the company. Okay, so therefore understand and managing this emission, okay, all this can have significant benefit for business, okay, the environment and society as a whole. Okay, so with this, I'd like to end my discussion. Please help to like and subscribe. Once again, Thank you so much for your strong support. I hope to see you guys soon. Bye for now.